and Dan, Jim as well, and Lee. Thanks to everybody for signing on here.
So we'll give people one more minute and then we'll begin.
It looks like such a great group today. I was thinking earlier when I was thinking about the Mark meeting, I was thinking how happy I was going to be to see you all. I don't know why, but I was just thinking about that. And now that so many of you all are there, I'm very happy.
Mm-hmm.
We're happy to see you too, Jan.
Mm-hmm. So, Dan, are you ready? Okay, I want to welcome everyone on this nice sunny day that you are taking time to be with us. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Doug Burks. I'm president of Mark. Reverend Melanie Slane of the Episcopal Diocese of Ohio will give us our opening prayer today.
The Lord be with you.
And with you.
So it's you.
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we know that when you speak, there is light and life, and when you act, there is justice and love. We ask that you be present in our meeting so that what we say and what we do may be filled with your creative spirit. We ask this all in your mighty name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Now for what is always our most exciting part of the meeting is our roll call of judicatory and guest. Please, when your judicatory is announced, raise your hand or speak up so that Holly can get your name. American Baptist Church USA, Miami Association. Mark Basil raised his hand. Archdiocese of Cincinnati.
Okay, let's see. I have Bob Ursum, Lee Wilson, Mary Partee, Karen Martin. Anyone else from the Archdiocese?
Nancy Doyle.
Oh, no. Okay. Okay, got it.
Okay. Cincinnati Islamic Community Center.
Tyrone Jackson present.
Yeah. Okay.
Diocese of Southern Ohio Episcopal Church.
Elizabeth Brown.
Karen Montano.
And Melanie.
And Melanie Slane.
Okay.
Disciples of Christ, Southwest Ohio. Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation.
Yeah, Jeremy Spiegel.
Great Miami River District United Methodist Church.
Dwayne Gordon.
Rhonda Deal.
And
Jan
Jan.
Seymour.
Okay. So just the three of you. Okay.
Lee, did we miss you? You're muted.
Oh,
Okay, now try. No, okay. Presbyterians. Religious Society of Friends.
JP Lund,
Jody Harris. Jody Harris.
Okay. I saw Henrietta Ballinger earlier,
okay.
and of course, Doug Burks.
And Carol just joined us.
Okay, and Carol Burks.
And Rowan Sinkwich, Volunteers of America.
We're getting to you, but you're here. Thank you. A Unitarian, no problem. Unitarian Universalist Council of Greater Cincinnati.
Bob Lamb,
Okay.
Dan Schneider.
Carol Fensel.
United Church of Christ of Southwest Ohio and Northern Kentucky.
Linda Overholt.
Jay Bradner in the house.
Okay. We've got in Volunteers of America. Guest and others, would you like to introduce yourselves and your denomination or organization?
I'm Ariel Miller from the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Ohio.
Okay. Josh Springs is here. Welcome.
Thank you. From the Homeless Coalition.
Great.
All right, that's good.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In your packets that you received via online, we have our meeting minutes from January 15th. Are there any corrections or changes we need to make? Hearing none, our minutes are approved. You also in your packet received an agenda for today. Are there any additions or corrections that people have for our agenda today? Hearing none, our minutes are approved. They have introduction from the Mark President. Next on our agenda, I really don't know what to say except welcome. I am really looking forward to this year, and I'm really looking forward to our presentation today. It is going to be a very timely message and very important for us to know what's going on. I now turn it over to Danny Burridge, our Executive Director for Mark Updates. Danny.
All right, thanks a lot, Doug. Appreciate everybody being here. Very glad to have such a wide representation from our adjudicatories, and also thank you so much to Josh Spring for being here to be our speaker. Just a few quick announcements. First, as you also see on your agenda, next month's Delegates Council meeting is on April 9th, also from 12 to 1:15 p.m., but it's going to be at a new location. It's going to be at the Corryville Branch Library. So encourage all of you to make the journey to Corryville/Clifton. It's right there on Short Vine. It's a great space. The speaker is, I could say it's a surprise, but it's actually still to be determined. So both of those are accurate. Doing a lot of good organizing with some local political representatives, trying to get folks on the schedule. Most of them are scheduling for for Delegates Council dates further into the future. But we'll have an excellent speaker for our April meeting as well. Rest assured, And again, it'll be at the Corryville Branch Library on Wednesday, April 9th at noon. From there, just want to announce, as many of you know, that we are now having our committee meetings. At our annual meeting earlier this year, we formally approved the formation of 3 committees. A committee on affordable housing, one of our ongoing concerns and a special concern for 2025, and also for community violence prevention. And so we had both of those meetings, had about 4 or 5 folks on those committee meetings. Really good content that we're already moving forward on. And just as relevant to this particular topic for today, our Affordable Housing Committee is already working on updating the housing principles for Mark. Back in 2013, Mark drafted a series of principles that are meant to guide our advocacy work on the topic of affordable housing and homelessness. And the board saw fit to have the Affordable Housing Committee update those principles for 2025. So we're in the process of doing that. Very exciting process. So that's just an example that's relevant to today's topic. The Community Violence Prevention Committee is also beginning its work. And finally, we have a strategic planning committee as well. That has about 10 members, which is wonderful. Also a very good representation from across the judicatories, looking at issues around fundraising, finance, long-term strategic planning in general terms, to make sure that Mark is very clear about its mission and what we need to do as an organization to fulfill our mission. So thanks to everybody who is already on a committee. And if you'd like to be on a committee, I personally would say still reach out. You know, some folks might say, no, we need to close it. But I think that we can definitely continue bringing members on to these committees if you are interested in contributing to those committees. So please let me know, or Holly, if you would still like to join a committee. Your voice and your energy is very welcome and will be put to good use. So without further ado,
Right, I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead, Enda.
At times, we don't think that things can get crazier. In the changing federal environment, policy towards homelessness and housing are changing rapidly. One local example is that on February 27th, the Greater Cincinnati's Housing Opportunities Made Equal was informed of a big cut of nearly $400,000 as their federal grant was being terminated immediately by the Trump administration in its efforts to reduce federal spending. We are going to see many changes locally, and they are going to have a big impact, and we're going to need to face those challenges. Today's speaker, Josh Spring, is the executive director of the Greater Cincinnati Homeless Coalition, and is going to speak today on where we are heading on housing. Josh is well known to us as a longtime advocate for the homeless and housing in Cincinnati. And looking at his bio, I'll just note one thing. One of his earliest work was with Tender Mercies, an organization that is dear to my heart, that I have been serving meals at for over 15 years. He has been a tireless worker. You can find his bio in our materials from today. They are extensive, and he has made a big difference. We are planning on about a 30-minute presentation or so, and a 30 to 35-minute question and answer period. And how Josh breaks that up is up to him. We know that he has so much to tell us about that I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's really important, and he's one of the most knowledgeable people I know in our area to help us to learn so that we can take action and move forward. So with that, I turn it over to Josh. And I really appreciate you being here today, Josh. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Doug. And thanks, everyone. Thank you for being here and allowing me to speak. So I guess I'll start by saying that as everybody here understands, in our city and in our county, we are still short tens of thousands affordable homes that are desperately needed. And it is still the case that in our city, approximately a third of our households cannot afford the housing that they live in today. And there are locally, despite what may be said or claimed, there is no significant movement at a city or county level in the government that will adequately address those problems. And it is to the point where the numbers of people living outdoors in our community is greater than we've seen. We've heard this past winter from Our Daily Bread, which serves meals daily, that they have seen the largest numbers of people coming through their line ever. Overwhelming numbers at the winter shelter through the night. Increased reports of families with children living outdoors in their cars. Significant numbers of families with children in cars. And it's gotten, in that example, it's gotten to the point where the more need there is, and as the supply to meet that need continues to be inadequate, you end up having to split hairs about who can access what. And so now our community is having to split hairs about what families with children can get on the waiting list to get into shelter. Not just who can get into shelter, but who can get on the waiting list. And so all of that is true, but the enormous elephant in the room is what is happening at the federal level, because whereas the federal government certainly has significant effect on what happens locally, in years gone by, the office of the presidency has not been an enormous focus for us, but now you can't help but be looking at being focused there. So to give some perspective, and I must say some of what I'm going to share, a good bit of what I'm going to share is possibilities. There's a lot of confusion and just things that we don't know exactly what's happening. But to start with something that we do know, so in cities and communities, rural spaces, urban spaces, etc., across the country, we have what's called continuums of care. And so those are administered by HUD. That is where money comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to fund housing that is specifically for people who are exiting homelessness, to fund shelter, etc. And already today, of the number of people that are estimated to be eligible for such housing services, only about a quarter actually receive those services. And each of those continuums are granted a certain amount of money each year that then pays for those services. And different continuums have their grant years start at different dates. And often HUD for years runs behind. So if your grant year started at the beginning of January, now we're in March, in a normal year, you may not have received your funding yet, right? So you are paying rents with money that you have on reserve or money that you've taken out in loans, and you're kind of floating the costs until the federal dollars come in. But there are now many communities across the country whose grant years have started, and they have not only not received their money, they have also not received any communication from HUD. And so what that means in a practical sense is that if you're a community and your normal solution would be you go and you take some loans, and then when the HUD money comes in, you pay it back immediately, you might not be able to get those loans now because you don't have anything saying that the HUD money is coming. And the more significant effect is that, especially for those grants that started in January, as now we're in March, each month that goes by, whatever loans, whatever reserves, programs and operators may have had is drying up. And soon rents will stop being paid. And if that continues across the country, the effects will be devastating. And so just to put that in perspective, and when I say rents being paid, so I'm referring to what's called permanent supportive housing, which is housing for folks who've exited homelessness and have a disabling condition, as well as rapid rehousing, which is it is what it sounds like it is, and transitional housing. So just various forms of supportive housing. And so on a national level, that accounts for approximately 766,000 households. In the state of Ohio, that is almost 25,500 households, and in the city of Cincinnati, almost 2,700 households. In the city of Cincinnati, our grant year starts July 1. And so we're not experiencing the same problems that other communities are yet. But if it continues, we're trying to right now communicate with agencies to ask if the money doesn't come, whether it be because the White House has frozen the money or somehow has just cut it off altogether, or you just haven't received it and there's been no communication. If that happens, how long can you float the bill until you have to stop paying the rents? And unfortunately, the answer in most cases is probably going to be not long. A month, 2 months, maybe 3 in some cases. And so if it continues, we start to see locally thousands, statewide tens of thousands, nationally hundreds of thousands of people that would lose their homes. And if you look at the trickle effect out, it's returning folks to homelessness, to shelter systems that are over capacity, are not going to have room for people, and then look at it from even the small business perspective. That's lots of landlords that now are not going to receive that income, and will they be able to pay their staff? And so the trickle effect is real in this situation, and it's significant. Much of what I say today is going to be gloom and doom, so I apologize for that. I'll try to say some hopeful things as well. In addition to this, the plan from the White House is to cut the staffing of HUD by 50%. Okay, and specifically in the office within HUD that deals with homelessness, everything I've just talked about, and public housing, to cut that office by 84%. So from a number of 960 some staff down to 150. So if you can imagine, I already shared that historically, dollars that are granted and supposed to start being spent, say January 1, might not be received till March. That was the case already. Imagine if 84% of your staff are gone. What does it look like then? So even just the idea of getting the dollars out the door so that the rents can get paid and staff can get paid becomes far more difficult. I'll give you an example. Our local continuum already could, say, ask a kind of a technical question of HUD and not get an answer for a year without 84% staff being laid off. And so I think some of the, lie that comes out of the White House at this point is, well, we're just laying off the staff. Well, of course, that has a terrible effect on those staff and the communities that they live in. But it's not just laying people off. It has a real effect on actually instituting the programs and making it all work. And in addition to that, the folks at the upper echelon, specifically in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but certainly in other departments, especially the Secretary of HUD that's appointed by the President and confirmed by Congress, the current guy that's in that position and the folks that he will appoint, they're not housing people. They're not folks that necessarily care about this. They're there for the president's agenda. But as you go down the hierarchy within the organization, within the department, you do have people that care about the mission and know how to do the work. Doesn't mean they always do it perfectly, but they know how to do it. And you can have some trust there. And 84% of those people in this department are being laid off, fired. And so some of that safety, just having somebody good doing the work goes away. And that is particularly worrisome. On public housing in particular, public housing, it's worth looking at Project 2025. There's chapter 15, which is about housing and homelessness. So this calls for a time limit on public housing, right? So you say, well, you can only live here, and 5 years is what it calls for. So you can only live here for 5 years. And but of course, in 5 years time, the situation on the ground in our communities and in our country, will you have more access to the income you need? Will you have more access to a job you may be able to work? Will you have access to other affordable housing? And unfortunately, the answer is likely no. And so the situation won't have changed much, but you will no longer have the housing if what they want to do stands. And they are even looking, as you know, to make cuts to Medicaid. So lessen the access that millions of people, eliminate access that millions of people have to healthcare, and then SNAP or food stamps. Put work requirements on food stamps, and even school meals, right? Meals that kids, free lunch program, meals that kids get over the summer, meals that kids take home to make it through the weekend. All of that is in jeopardy. And on top of it, of course, then there's the issue of immigration. And so we have been working to assist our member organizations that are shelters and providers of hospitality to prepare for potential ICE raids. So there's good reason to think that ICE will target shelters in particular. And so working to prepare shelters to know how to handle that so that they can prepare their front desk staff to deal with what would be probably a very stressful, possibly traumatic experience of having ICE officials, demanding entry to grab people. And so preparing for that. And, it's gotten, with all of the, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion are the hot words that this administration is attacking. And so agencies are thinking about, okay, do we need to remove these words from everything we do? We've got to cut all these words out. And because if we don't, who knows? At a moment's notice, one of Elon Musk's staff could say, we're cutting off the funding. And I would say in some years in the past, that would have seemed a bit outlandish that there could be that kind of acute action, but it's not outlandish anymore. It's real. We heard that some of the folks that provide technical assistance through HUD, so HUD contracts them to provide technical assistance, for example, to local continuums to solve problems, institute new programs, etc. That many of those have been totally eliminated, and that a number of folks in those roles recently, a week or so ago, they were at a national conference, right? So they got an email saying your contract is ended. The conference isn't over, right? Your contract is ended, and if you don't get on a plane today, we're not going to pay for your plane ride home, right? So it's that kind of immediate action is real and is happening. The layoffs that I've described from HUD, the plan is for those all to happen in less than 120 days at this point, probably about 100 days. So it goes on and on. I will add that the other thread, and this stuff is in Project 2025, is this administration wants to end housing first, right? So housing first it's really a concept that if you're human, then you deserve housing. And if you are dealing with mental illness or addiction or anything else, you deserve housing. And so let's get you housing, and then everything else has a better chance of improving. It's logical, it makes sense. And And so the housing that I described earlier, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, is supposed to operate with that mentality. And it hasn't always been this way. For years, we were a treatment first country. Not everybody needs treatment of some sort, but get your treatment, and then if you're dealing with addiction, somehow into recovery while still living in shelter or outdoors, and then you can have housing. So this administration wants to do away with housing first. In fact, I just read a quote from Project 2025, which it says, "Housing first is a far left idea premised on the belief that homelessness is primarily circumstantial rather than behavioral." But we know homelessness is primarily caused because we don't have enough affordable housing. And there's certainly nothing radical at all about the idea that people should have a home. The administration, or in Project 2025, it says, let's convert housing to transitional housing, which has a time limit on it. What does that mean exactly? It's hard to say, because the people that are writing it don't know exactly what they're talking about. But you imagine of the, it's about 680, almost 681,000 people, or households rather, more people than that, 681,000 households that are in what this administration would term housing first across the country. If suddenly now this is all transitional housing, what does that mean? Does that mean that those households, do they have a year left they have to leave within? Do they have to leave right away because now it's something else? What does it mean? And all of that on top of we have less staff, much less staff to make anything work. The funding may not be coming, and all of that amounts to a lot of risk. And kind of to tie it up, the Project 2025 and this administration really wants communities to increase criminalization of people experiencing homelessness, specifically people outdoors. And they're following, clearly within Project 2025, they're following the lead of an organization called the Cicero Institute, which you might look up. The Cicero Institute is a billionaire-funded organization whose one of their primary focuses is criminalizing people without homes. And so they have been pushing model legislation around the country to try to get cities and states to criminalize people, but not just criminalize people, to forcefully, involuntarily commit people to institutions, to make it easier for that to be the case, to have detention camps, to gather people and put people in forced areas where this is the only place you can be. And you think about, so the current head of HUD, appointed by the White House and Congress, when he was asked, are you opposed to using detention camps? He would not answer the question. He would not say he was opposed to it. He did admit that having a national camping ban, so saying it's illegal to be outdoors without a home in the United States, he did admit that that would take an act of Congress. That said, lots of things that we thought took an act of Congress haven't been lately. But more notably, what if this administration says to the city of Cincinnati or to the state of Ohio, we are not going to send you any more federal dollars unless you make it illegal for people to be outdoors without a home, unless you gather up people, we're not going to send you any more federal dollars. What would happen? And those are the kind of threats that this administration makes. And so that's the power of those purse strings is very significant. And so all of that bad stuff, and the question is, what do we do about all of it? So I think one is we have to do our best to be informed, certainly, and to get information from reliable sources. We are with, taking kind of the lead from some national organizations, we are encouraging people to contact members of Congress, especially people in the Republican Party, to point out the real harm that everything that I talked about will have across the country and into their constituencies, and then to put pressure on the Democratic Party to hold their colleagues accountable. I think a lot of Republican representatives have stopped holding town halls and stopped communicating with their constituencies because some of their constituencies that voted for this administration are seeing that this could negatively affect them and are contacting their representatives, but the representatives are trying not to listen. And so making those contacts, making the phone calls, sending the emails, it is all important. We are also at the national levels, we're part of the National Homeless Coalition. We're having discussions about what are direct actions that we can take across the country. And it remains to be seen. But, in years past, groups like ours and groups across the country have for example, have determined buildings that are publicly owned and vacated and go and take them over and demand that they be turned over for housing. There's also the thought that as criminalization increases, especially in Washington, D.C., where it's expected the president will order the National Park Service to clear people off of federal lands. Do we have people there and in other places that form a blockade, a physical block? And then, of course, in immigration, how do we protect people? I've already shared that our shelters are preparing, and this is something hopefully everyone here is thinking about too. I think the simplest part of what we've learned is to clearly label the places in your facility that are private versus public, because without a proper warrant, law enforcement of any sort is not allowed to go into private areas. So whether you're a an office, a place of worship, a shelter, a soup kitchen, whatever. Labeling those clearly is important. So I've said a lot, and I'd love to see if folks have questions or comments.
As we start with questions, if you can use the raised hand function, which on mine is under React, that helps us because we have two screens. So any questions?
I'll raise my hand real quick just to say thank you so much, Josh. There was a decent amount of doom and gloom, but that, of course, is not your fault. And thank you so much for providing us with that information, knowing that it is coming from reliable sources. And you mentioned a lot as far as possible actions at the national level. Could you speak a little bit to what you are thinking as far as things at the local level? Mark historically tries to focus its activity on local advocacy initiatives. Do you see anything at the local level, be it city or county, that we could be prioritizing as an organization and as individuals?
Yeah, thanks. And I did put some links in the chat there. The first one will take you to some actions you can take, and then the second two are two useful news articles. Yes, in terms of local action, so there is a group, Communities United for Action is kind of taking the lead on this. There will be a town hall at Christ Church with Greg Landsman. I think the effort there is to give him more information that he can use to push against what's happening at the federal level. So to give him more of the practicalities of what all of this would do here. And I can, probably the best thing to do, Danny, is I can make sure that that information is sent to you so that you can share it with folks. But that's coming up. And then the other is, it's somewhat speculative, but I'll just put it out there as we're thinking through what happens if the federal funds don't come. We may decide that we want to put some pressure, say, on the city or the county to set some money in reserves. There's a limited effect that can have because it takes a lot of money to keep people in housing. But we've not called for that at this point, but I just put it out there in case we do, and you wouldn't be surprised by it. And then I see a couple.
Right. Next, Elizabeth Brown, and then is it Carol Fensel? And then Mark Basil. So Elizabeth.
Danny took my question, so I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Carol.
I just wanted to reemphasize what Josh was saying about the churches having to labeling something private and figuring out what to do if ICE does come to the door. There are a number of places that are doing Know Your Rights training. And if you have a chance to have the leaders in your organization know about that, every one of us who's on the call today can go home and talk to the person in charge of your board or who's ever in charge of your building and ask what are they doing to prepare if ICE comes to the door. That's something that every church can be thinking about.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark. You're muted. Mark, unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I'm surprised at the volume of executive orders that have come out since the inauguration. I know that executive orders are considered like the lowest rung of presidential powers, but I guess I'm surprised more aren't getting challenged. What can be done to challenge more of these outrageous executive orders?
Yeah, thank you. There are quite a few, suits that have been filed across the country, spurred on by these executive orders. So I think what can be done is, well, so one, and I'm certainly not an expert or have knowledge of all the suits that have been filed, but I'm sure that there are suits filed from the collections of the faith community, if you will. And so there might be places where the group you're a part of, the denomination you're a part of, could maybe join. And I can't tell you specifically what those are, but I know that that the faith community has been a part of legal action. And and then I think also, something that keeps going through my mind is I think there's a lot of people out there that voted for this administration somehow without realizing that all of this that is proposed or is happening will have a negative effect on themselves and their family and people in their communities. Of course, this administration has preyed on people's prejudices and fears to say, well, the reason that you're having a hard time is because people that don't look like you took it from you and took whatever you needed. Of course, that's not the case, and when people stop, when your family member stops being able to afford food, having trouble feeding their kids because they don't have food stamps anymore, can't get health care anymore, that stuff might start to hit home. And I don't know, the faith communities in those areas, suburban and rural areas in particular, might want to be prepared to be there to receive people and say, yeah, it has been a lie, and what can we do together to push back?
As part of faith communities, not only having a sign, there is an act in Congress right now called Protecting Sensitive Locations Act of 2025. And this emphasizes that certain sites are protected from ICE, which includes churches, schools, healthcare. And so the idea of religious sanctuary, which actually the Quakers have done some lawsuits. But when you do contact your representatives to talk about that, can be useful, is that Trump has ignored that idea and rule. And so this would make it explicit law. Tyrone, and then Jonathan, and then Mackenzie. So Tyrone.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just want to make a recommendation. You take a car, you drive a car, and when you drive a car, it has what's called a spare tire. Okay, in case something happens to the tire, you have a spare. So I'm saying it to say, I'm recommending everyone to think about having a spare income. And there, shall we say, three types of economies as it relates to personally. There's the people who work a job and they depend on that, whatever income stream they can get from that. There are people who have retirement incomes, which is retirement and different other certain things like Social Security, that type of thing, and whatever assistance. And the third being entrepreneurship. As far as a job, maybe don't get too secure in that because it hits others and hadn't hit you yet. Don't get too secure. As for Social Security or some type of assistance, don't get too secure in that. So the third one, entrepreneurship, the thing about it, developing some skill set or whatever you need to do to develop that spare income to lean on and to do it before, you have to call upon it. So I just wanted to share that. And it's just about being proactive rather than reactive. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you. Jonathan.
One of the things that the Greater Cincinnati Faith Leader Organization, or budding organization that Danny and I have been meeting with the Black clergy across Cincinnati, one of the things that they wanted to emphasize to congregations is to start storing food, to be an actual storehouse of food. And I know that sounds pretty basic. A lot of us probably work at food pantries or have food pantries connected with our churches, but to go a step further and almost having like a secret stash of stored food for those, because I know there can be bureaucracy with food pantries and how often you can come and what zip code you can belong to, but just having like a dedicated stash of food somewhere in your church that you can be ready to hand out at any given time. That sounds basic, but just do it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for that. And I had just a basic question, Josh, but you might have mentioned it and I just missed it. But do shelters receive HUD funding too?
Yes. Yeah. Shelters do receive HUD funding. It tends, depending on the size of the shelter, the HUD funding tends to be a smaller percentage of what they spend. Whereas on the flip side, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, the HUD funding is practically 100%.
Got it. Cool. Yeah. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Danny.
So just returning a little bit to thinking about our local leaders here. Just this morning, Mayor Purival was on Fresh Air with Jen White. This is a national program talking about Cincinnati, kind of in conversation with Missoula, Montana, which was interesting. But he mentioned that he feels like Cincinnati truly can or should think about investing in itself. That we shouldn't think about necessarily relying on federal or state funds. Again, as we've talked about, these are not going to be assured for a lot of these services. But it also, I feel skeptical thinking that, this idea that Cincinnati can, and I would hope that this would be the case, but, Josh, what's your sense of, to what extent can Cincinnati, kind of circle the wagons at a local level and draw on support from the business community, the philanthropic community, like really kind of join forces across different actors and entities to kind of shore up these gaps? Do you feel like that's a feasible plan? Thinking about, is it the only plan at a certain level?
Yeah. So certainly becoming more able to support ourselves locally is ideal. I will say that, for all these years that we have pushed funding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that has been one of our strongest arguments of saying we cannot rely on the federal government. And so we need to, similar to what Tyrone was saying, we need to start setting aside our local resources to build the housing that we need here locally. And I think it's a good example because the mayor, this mayor and the previous mayor, and the business community have fought us every step of the way on doing really exactly what he's talking about. Except it's not exactly because it would primarily benefit people who are struggling. And I think that's where the rub comes, because, yes, I think that the business community could step up some. Do I think that they are going to step up of a level that really long-term prevents some of the hardship that could be coming? I don't think so. I mean, they haven't done so to date, and I think that the circling of the wagons is really us saying we are going to make decisions here that are about ensuring that regular folks have the access that we need to everything to live the fullest life we can, and really that takes more than the businesses are going to be willing to do, and I think it takes us continuing to push, and it takes us prioritizing. I mean, similar. As I think about this, I think, what's the big conversation happening now in our city is people are saying, where should we put a new arena, right? A new arena, things like that. I don't know that we should ever prioritize that, but wouldn't it be time, if you're the mayor, saying, well, what can we do locally to say, let's stop talking about it. Let's focus on the needs that we have, especially given that the feds may dry up the funds that are coming.
Right. And if you're not speaking, if you would mute, because we are getting some feedback, that would be very helpful. Next is Ariel, then Jan, and then Lee Wilson had her hand up. So let's start with Ariel.
Thank you, Doug. I really liked your idea, Danny, about putting together an emergency fund. And I'm remembering I think it was called the Weathering the Storm Fund at the start of the recession in 2009, where the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, United Way, and other funders put together a response to the critical needs then, with so many people losing their jobs. And I think catalyzing something like that, I wonder if discussions are underway, because that would be such a good community organizing tool. And I'm also thinking about the anniversary of the events on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and kind of the national outrage when people were beaten so savagely. And I'm wondering if some events that really publicize individual trauma, like John Lewis being beaten or whatever, that if when you talk about occupying a building and things like that, that this kind of storytelling and national coverage of putting a face on it, so we can't just kind of treat people with housing insecurity as like garbage that needs to be swept up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. And I one of the articles from Shelter Force that I put in the chat is is particularly good because it talks about the funds not being distributed yet, and it interviews real people and how it's affecting them already. Yeah, but I thank you, Ariel.
Jan and then Lisa. Jan?
Well, some of the stuff I'm going to say is probably going to be laughed at, especially by Josh. But I keep thinking that we've gotten to a point in Cincinnati where we have people who are concerned about affordable housing and other issues affecting people in poverty. The faith community seems to be on that side, and I would call that side maybe the progressive side politically. And it's like we have created a city council, a court system now that is mainly made up of people that our side, has elected. It seems like city council has switched over from listening to progressive people and listening to the business community. As in the Futures Commission, they're putting together the business community to say what needs to be done. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a coalition of people like us, the faith community and the business community? I mean, it's really not fair to say the business community is anti-faith. I'm sure there are many faithful believers in the business community. And there must be people in the business community who see the need for truly affordable housing. And what I keep thinking is it doesn't have to be a us versus them or a them versus us. If we could some way come together and solve this conundrum that we've got going, where you either respond to the business community or you respond to, I don't know, the faith community or the people like us. So that's my thing, is how could we go about doing that? Because I keep thinking the business community, if they could only see that taking people out of poverty gives them more customers, gives them more taxpayers. It's good for everybody to do away with poverty. It's not like we're bleeding heart liberals who just want to do away with poverty. Doing away with poverty is good for everyone. So that's what I wanted to say, that's maybe a little laughable that we could come together with the business community, but I wish we could try to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. So my couple of cents would be, I think there may be opportunity with some of the quote business community. I think, again, it's my 2 cents. I think when you get to the very tops of the business community, I don't think there's a great deal of opportunity there, because I think the truth is that they benefit from poverty, and so ending poverty would not be positive for them. But that said, something that I think we could do a better job of is, there's always, for years and years, lots of talk about small businesses. But I think getting to the smaller companies, the smaller businesses, is where, we might find more common ground, and where it might be more true that, that they too would benefit. And so I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't see a great deal of reason to spend a lot of time on the top folks, but the mid and lower level probably is worth it.
Lee.
Yeah, so what Josh said, I totally agree with. I'm thinking, Cincinnati has always been a very benevolent city in terms of supporting others. And it feels like we need to understand that the federal plan at this point is not going to work, period. So we need to come up with our own plan for our city. Let's say the businesses do chime in and give us funds So how are we going to manage it? What's the plan? We can say, hey, here's our plan. Can you give us money? But I think without that plan, I don't know how we get it and how we manage it, because what's going to happen, what has always happened, is other states, cities put folks on the bus, more homeless people, send them to Cincinnati. And Cincinnati has all the programs. So I think in a real sense, we need to figure out what is our plan. You know, what are we really going to do if ideally we get everything we need or most of what we need? We're always going to have poor among us. That's not going to go away. But how do we help the ones that we have and not keep growing, because we're growing?
I see Elizabeth with a hand, if you'd like to
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just like to, this is more short term than we've been talking sort of big projects, and I agree with what folks have been saying. This is an election year in the city of Cincinnati and other cities in our area in Ohio. And this city council, that many of whom are mostly running again, talk about affordable housing. And I think it's really time for us all to be pushing back on them and making clear, particularly this year as they are out as candidates and not just elected officials, what our expectations are. And that's that the city step up. I mean, this morning, my church was asked by the city to house a homeless family because they didn't know where else to send them. During the winter, we've been asked several times to do things by the city, to do things that I consider basic government responsibilities, to keep people from freezing to death. And I think if the faith communities in general do a little pushing back and say, no, this isn't about churches providing these services. This is about you, city, and prioritizing your residents and not just prioritizing other things. I think it's important in all the small interactions we have with the city, whether it's administrative folks or elected officials, that we make that point that they need to prioritize these things and that they're basic government responsibilities to keep their residents alive.
Mhm. Yes, I could not agree more. Elizabeth is right. It is an election year, and yes, everything that Elizabeth said is correct, and that this city is increasingly trying to push off city duties to private entities.
Okay, Jan, did you have one last question? No. I have a question, and we've been looking at more of the macro and not the micro. And one of the things that Mark, we discuss is not only our advocacy, but what can we do? And you have such extensive experience. What would you say to everyone here today that they could do individually? Maybe just one afternoon or the other, but how do you build up individual action that has synergy that then ripples out? We talked about protest. Well, I'm of that age of the 70s of protest where individuals stood up and did things. I write my representatives. What, from your experience, would you suggest that people look at doing, or who they would contact, that they could take individual actions and start to take maybe small steps?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, a couple thoughts. One is I think, as you've already said, is the contacting of elected representatives, as we've talked about. I think also in regards to city council, I think it'd be worth it to contact members of council and set up a meeting between yourself and that member of council and talk with them specifically about what you are concerned about. And if you want some assistance in getting prepared for that meeting, we could help you with that, so that you know when what they're saying is real or when it's BS. You'd be able to see that. I think that's a good opportunity. I also think that there's opportunity, especially within the faith community, within places of worship, to to gather congregants together to learn more about what is happening, right? To learn the truth of what is occurring, what is threatened, what the threats are, and because there is so much happening, so much being talked about. I think it can be very difficult for people to sort out what is real, what isn't real, what do we need to focus on, what do we not need to focus on, and then I agree with somebody said it, Jonathan said it. I think figuring out the things that your congregation or your group can do in your neighborhood or your town is important. Hanging those signs to designate public from private, gathering together food, as we've said, even the benevolent offerings, gathering some money because there potentially be more people who aren't going to be able to make their rent. I think there are smaller actions like that don't fix it, but better prepare you to be able to respond to some people when they knock on the door, because they're probably going to come knocking. So yeah, that, and then I think just staying connected, because as we learn more and figure out more what's going on and where we need to be pushing, then we'll communicate it out and hope to stand together in whatever action that is.
Doug, you're on mute. I think Doug just said something very profound, and he said something funny too. But Doug, we did not hear that.
I said I would give you the last question since you're the boss.
Oh, I appreciate that. I was trying to take that anyways. Because yeah, we do want to respect everybody's time. We were at about 1:15. Well, we said we'd end at 1:15. We're a little bit over. And less a question and more kind of trying to synthesize some of our comments here and frame this as a task and a challenge for Mark as an organization. Just highlighting, Jan and other folks within our Delegates Council have mentioned this before, raising up this question: can we think about reaching out to the business community to try to collaborate, invite them, try to pressure them to be on board with our concerns about truly investing and advocating for affordable housing? Same way with city council, kind of being, having a collaborative, open relationship, saying, hey, let's work together. Or, I think Elizabeth also said it very compellingly, that it seems, and Josh too, been always at the forefront of saying this, that they have had a wealth of opportunities to kind of, be that magnanimous, generous kind of role and invest proactively in these things. So as Mark, do we, kind of keep this collaborative approach open, or at what point do we start saying, as a faith community, we have demands, we have an agenda, we have proposals, this is what we want, this is what we need, this is what our communities and the people who are the least of us in terms of housing, in terms of services, in terms of needs? Do we put forth a much more proactive agenda and a proposal and say, this is what we need. These are our principles. And this is what we are asking of you. This is what we are demanding of you as our representatives, and election year is here. Do we end up saying something like, our votes as people of faith in this city who could either keep you in office or not? We want you, for instance, to sign on to, like we sign on as representatives, as candidates to this agenda, to some version of like a housing first for Cincinnati kind of agenda. I think that that's where we're at as Mark, that we need to truly discuss, what, at this moment, I'm new. We're trying to have we want to revitalize our voice in the city as Mark. And what will that look like on housing? Do we want to continue kind of extending the olive branch to leaders? Or is this an urgent enough time that we want to take potentially a more, I don't want to say confrontational, but, to have a more proactive approach in terms of saying, this is what we want, this is what we demand of you. And so maybe, at future meetings of our committees and our board, and maybe by next Delegates Council meeting, we'll have something that we can vote on in this spirit about really kind of solidifying an agenda for moving forward for this election year. And then Lee has a hand too.
Make it right. Unmute Lee. Thank you.
Okay, so just real quick, I like what you're saying, Daniel, but can we get our mayor here for our next meeting? We can propose and pose the questions that we've come up with today and see what his take on it really looks like. And then we can put a plan together to impact the election year.
I think that's great. We are, like I said at the beginning, we are reaching out to elected officials. Folks are scheduled for the future, but we need somebody for April. So, I had met him at a meeting, got his scheduler, reached out to them, never heard back. So I'd be happy to reach out
Jan
again.
Michelle. We don't want Jan Michelle.
Right.
Okay.
No, I
Because
know.
he tries to send her everywhere.
Right.
We want the mayor, we want to hear from him so that we can put together a proactive plan on how we're going to impact the elections in Cincinnati.
Right.
That sounds great to me.
Yeah.
I mean, if
Yeah, I
nobody
think one
is
of the
opposed,
problems is that the election process has already started. And so since he's a current candidate, already has had a fundraiser that I know of, it's sort of iffy when we invite people who are running for office, I think.
Right. I think this would be a good.
He'll decide. He'll
discussion.
decide how important this is, right?
Yeah.
He'll decide, right?
Okay.
and then
one of
Elizabeth, did
the,
you have something real quick too?
I just, right, I think that we ought to be sensitive to our time. We will have many more discussions. And so it's now 1:24. And so one of the joys of being president is to express appreciation to those who serve us. And I really want to thank Josh for sharing with us today. I also want to express our appreciation for his long years of service and doing good within our community. It's hard and frustrating work. And so it weighs on you. I also appreciate that Josh, over his years, has been willing to speak the truth as he sees it. People haven't always agreed with him, but I think that there's a respect that he is speaking truth as he sees it, and that he'll listen and change. And so, we're very appreciative of Josh and our ability to work in collaboration with him. I also appreciate Melanie Slane for sharing an opening prayer with us today. And finally, I really appreciate all of you here today, because you have contributed to us working within the community and doing good. And one of the things that I've said is that Mark does good because the people who are active in it are active and they are committed to doing good. So I want to thank you. One last reminder, as Danny gave you earlier, our next delegates meeting is on April 9th. It's in person and it's going to be at the Corryville Branch Library. And so everyone, thank you for being here today. I really do appreciate that what everyone is doing here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Josh. Great meeting.
Thanks, everybody.